Okay, now this video is about colliders and rigid bodies. Colliders are kind of what they sound like. You collide with something. And a rigid body, well, you can collide with a steam. You can collide with steam, but it doesn't hurt you, right? I mean, unless you're going like Mach 500, those little water particles aren't doing much. So, uh, so rigid body is for solid objects with some sort of mass, typically. Whether it's in outer space and they have no gravity around them, or whether they're on a planet or a surface of the game or a scene and have some solidity to them. So we're going to go to our loading game here. I'm going to make a copy rather than mess with it, because we're still in the teaching phase, not in the making the game the way we want to look phase. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to make a new, I selected it and did a Control C and a Control V, copy paste, and we're going to call this colliders. All right, and we're going to double click on that to make sure we have colliders chosen. And to confirm it, it says that up here. That's the name of our scene, and it says it up here as the name of our scene. All right, so we know we can collide with some of these objects because we did, and we know we can collide with that cube because we did. But let's put something more interesting in there that we can play with. So for the capsule, it had a capsule collider. For this cube, it had a box collider. We looked at it. This sphere had a sphere collider, which, you know, it kind of obvious that those all go together. Let's do something called, let's make a directory here. Let's see. I'll make a folder up here called colliders, collisions stuff. Not a good name, but... And then let's put a rock in the collision stuff. Boom, there's a rock in the world. So, and I'll just kind of explain here, LOD is level of detail. So the farther out you go, the less detail the computer has to compute. And you can see it slide here as I do this. So if you're here, you see the highest level of detail, 0. Lower level of detail, lower level. Guess what the word culled means? Boom, disappears. No point in computing it. Doesn't make much difference. And you can change these numbers so that you can still see it at different values. And that's all this is the level of detail control allows you to play with those numbers. It's extremely effective with trees and bushes because it doesn't get far along before it doesn't really matter if you're seeing a bush or a dot of green. You can't tell, right? So they can add levels of details. I think the most I've seen is 4. This one had, that technically I guess is 4, what the last one is called. And you can read up on this, but we're not going to be covering this probably in this class because generally an object that has one comes with one. So if I hit play right now, what'll happen with that rock? Rocks are heavy, right? So you would think it would fall to the ground. And we fall to the ground. The rock stays in the air. The ball fell still. The cube's not falling to the ground, but I told you I turned off gravity on that, so that makes sense. But I didn't turn off or on gravity here. So let's add some mass to this thing, and that's done through what's called a rigid body. Don't do rigid body 2D, never do 2D in a 3D game. And we're going to expand rigid body, and I'm going to Google, and I already did because I looked it up, how much does a 10-foot rock weigh in kilograms? And I'm just going to pick a number of 8,000. And it doesn't really matter, it's a lot. All right, now I weigh about 200 pounds, so how much does this weigh? The rigid body's up here. I'm pretty sure I weigh more than 1 kilogram, so I'm going to go back to here. How many kilograms is 200 pounds? I'll say 100. just because it's an easy number to remember. It doesn't really matter, it's just something, right? 100. That's why we didn't move that red cube too much, as we weighed 1, which is, if I weigh 200 and that's 100 approximately, then 50 kilograms would be closer to 100 pounds, and 1 kilogram would be closer to 5 pounds, and this red cube had a rigid body of 34 pounds, so yeah, or 34 kilograms. All right, so to the rock, that's why it was hard for us to move it. Go back here. Uh-oh, I put the rigid body in the wrong spot. I think I can drag it up to the rock. I cannot, so I'm going to remove it here. I accidentally added it to the LOD 0 item, right? I wanted to add it to the rock. Rigid body, I think we said 8,000. Now what happens if I hit play? And I wish it would be a little faster. It'd be nicer on the videos. Oh, gee, that was cute. It went straight through the floor. At least it fell. That's an improvement. So that brings us to another topic, and that is colliders. So the floor has a mesh collider, okay? The capsule has a capsule collider. The rock doesn't have a collider, so it doesn't collide with anything. Let's add a collider. And there's several types of collider. We could put a box collider around it. I'll show you what that would look like. You kind of have to edit it because it's not always the right size. We could make it kind of fit, right? We could drag the sizes out, and oops, and that's part of the problem with these darn trying to edit these 2D things. Dragging it out. I don't even see the one for the other side. It's really annoying to see these little. I wish they made these dots a lot bigger. Here somewhere is a dot, so I'm going to change the width of it up here. I'm pretty sure I can. The size, the Z of it. That's the Z. Okay, let's make the Z wider. Now I could do that, and let's even drag this one down further so it covers the bottom. In many cases, something like that would work because a box collider doesn't take the computer much to think. All right, but if it's something we're going to be navigating around, we would be colliding with a corner and not with the rock. Let's see if it goes through the floor now. And it's thinking. Boom, it did not go through the floor. Awesome. So let's make this bigger so we can see it. And let's watch what happens. Oop, I collided here, not with the rock. That's kind of annoying when you have a game like that, right? So if it's something you're going to not collide with, unless you go from, like jump up through hoops on the top of a tree or something, when you just don't want to do all the detail, and you shouldn't have to anyway. So we're going to skip that, and we're going to get rid of the box collider. And I do that by clicking on the box collider has 3 dots to the right, and I'm going to go remove component. Now let's add a component, and unfortunately it remembers a lot of. We could do a capsule collider and make it sideways. We could do a mesh collider like the floor. And let's go to mesh collider. And let's see what happens if I go to a mesh collider. Probably not what you expect. It goes through the floor. Why is that? Because although we said we're going to have a mesh collider, we didn't tell it which mesh. And I knew that, but I wanted you to see, because if that happens to you, you'll go, oh yeah, I remember we did something about that. Now, oddly shaped things, not always, but come with their own colliders. So you click on this little dot here, and it's almost always named the same. This is Rock 01, so let's go to Rock 01, in this case LOD0, which is the closest we can get. And that, I click it here and it selects it here. That makes that mesh this. It doesn't have color, it's just the mesh. Where are the collision points of it? So now let's hit play, and now it has a collider that matches the shape of the object. Mesh colliders are more expensive, computing-wise, to do. Well, it still went through the floor. I must have forgotten something. Let's see one more time. I think maybe convex is the answer. I'll explain the difference if it is. Convex, if you have a frisbee, the top side is bulged out. So that, there we go, that was it. On a frisbee, the top side is bulged out. That is convex. The other side of the frisbee bows in. That is concave, like a cave, a hole in the ground, concave. Unity does not support convex colliders. So I said make it concave. Or I'm sorry, it doesn't support concave colliders. Let me restart from the beginning. It does not support concave colliders. It only supports convex colliders. So what it did was, let me pick the rock here. Like this area here, there's a dip in there, right? Well, Unity does not support making the mesh collider go in the dip. So what it does is it kind of draws a line from this point to this point and makes the collision point that line. You can't really see the collision points on these, and that's annoying. I wish we could. So anyway, but that's what the problem was. Not only did I have to pick the collider that was designed to go with that object. I could have used a box, I could have used a capsule, but I picked the one that came with it, and because the object itself has concave points, it just doesn't work. I wish it would tell you. There might be a warning up here. I've got some stuff, I've got debugging stuff in here that's not done yet. Yeah, it didn't tell us. Sometimes it'll say we don't support a concave mesh. Anyway, so we checked convex. And because it had gravity, it fell. Now, if we turn off gravity, it'll be like that red cube. It'll just sit there. It has a rigid body, but it doesn't weigh anything. It's ignoring the mass, basically. So we'll give it gravity, and constraints here we'll use in a second. Okay, so now we're back where we were at. So the rigid body is something solid, or is something with mass. It exists, not like steam. A collider, you can collide with steam. You just won't impact with you. There's no punch to it. So you can have a collider without a rigid body, and you can detect that you got into it, but nothing happens. Now I'm going to show you this. Now you notice how that rock, I'll let it fall again. You notice, watch the rock roll a little bit when it lands. It falls, and you'll notice these numbers up here kind of move all over the place as it falls, right? Until it finally settles. All right? Now let's say, but the constraint constrains one of them. Now if I do, let's say let's constrain the X, Y, and the Z rotation and watch what happens. Now this is important sometimes because you want something to drop vertically, and you want that to be part of the mystery. Watch. Boom. It doesn't roll because we have constrained it from rotating. But if I uncheck the Y, it adjusts it. If I uncheck the Z and the X, boom, it can now rotate in those directions. And the same is true with the position. I can make it not go forward and backward, but only fall left or right or up and down. So let's see what that looks like. Right? So it's going to stay on that edge because it can't roll on the Z direction. So it can't quite fall all the way. Now if I release it, there it goes. Boom. Right? And so there are times, like in some games, the player keeps falling over because the terrain is really rough. So I'll constrain it in the vertical direction, Y. And that means that it can't, or I'll, maybe the X or the, in the Z direction, but not the Y direction, so it can turn. And by playing with this, you can make it so the player doesn't fall over all the time. It's kind of like gravity only in the directions it's allowed to apply to. So now we've discussed the rigid body, which is something that you can hit with your fist and it would hurt. The collider, which is something that exists that you can run into. You can run into a rock or you can run into steam, only one of which hurts, right? So you can collide with anything that exists, but it may or may not have a solidity. It may or may not be solid. Drag is how much backwards force. So if I'm pushing through forward, the player has by default 0 drag. And I go back to player over here. Let's give it 100 drag. What the heck? Let's see what that does. I'm pushing forward on the stick, and you can see it wiggle, but it just can't move because the dress like sticky carpet. Let's change it to 10, and I can move, but it's much slower because it's dragging me out. So that's what that is for. Angular drag is kind of similar, but frankly, I have to look it up every time. Now, we hit that, and it went flying, because the box weighed 30-some pounds or something. I don't know what it was, or we did. I'm going to hit this rock. Boom. It weighs 8,000 to my 35. I mean, it's pretty much like reality, right? It fell, it had mass, but I can't really move it. And if I get way back and hit it, can I? No, I don't even think it bounced. And that'd be, you know, if we had an ouch sound, it would be making an ouch sound about right now. We just can't make it move. So, and there's different parts to these. Let's see if there's anything that's important that I forgot. Layers. You can say, and I'm not going to teach you this because it's another whole lesson, but you can say, for example, that the enemy, let's say the enemy was a ghost, but the ghost could be solid or it could be gaseous. So you could make it so that the ghost could pass through the rocks, but not the player. And so with that, you can edit layers and get it to pass through the objects you want, but not through other objects. It would kind of look like magic. And it'd make it look like you did a lot of programming when in fact the only thing you did was click a couple of buttons. Okay, so let's go to kinesthetic. What the heck is kinesthetic? Let's move this rock down and turn off gravity. But it's not touching the ground. Nope. Okay. So we have gravity turned off. Ooh, I guess I didn't hit that particular button. Give me a second here. And anyway, you can hear my weather report here in the background probably. All right, so it has no gravity, so let's see what happens. Can I even hit it? Boom, I went through it. Oh, I hit part of it. I can move it, see? But it has no gravity, which is kind of cool. That'd be great for an outer space scene. Now, if I turn on kinesthetic, I think it has physics, but no gravity, which means it'd be like hitting an 8,000-pound floating rock. Actually, let's lower it a bit when I hit it so I can really give it a good whack. Boom. Okay, there it is. It reacts to physics, which is me hitting it. It doesn't go anywhere because I have gravity turned off, but it reacts to physics because I have the word kinesthetic turned on. But if I turn them both off, which you can do at runtime, by the way, boom. I kind of went through the edge of the rock. All right. You can turn them on at runtime. And it doesn't remember that. Watch what happens when I turn gravity on. I'm going to kind of see if I can be under it. Boom, now it responds to gravity. It smashed me. Okay. I was so lucky right there. And it might come over and still hit me. Actually, the colliders are pushing me away. The ones that were invisible, is kind of pushing. All right, so you can adjust these at runtime, but now I'm just for the heck of it, I'm gonna turn them all three off, and then I'm gonna watch what happens here when I stop playing the game. They go back to normal. The reason it does that, and you can do that with a lot of things, is that you can play with it, try settings. I have a little notepad next to me, and I go, this is what worked. sometimes I have to record these numbers, sometimes I have to record these numbers or whatever. I said, this gives the effect that I want. Then I hit the stop button and it resets them, and then I type in what I wanted to make it the effect I wanted. And it's really a nice feature because it lets you play with the numbers. So with that, we have rigid body and colliders and meshes. Mesh colliders usually have to have they must have a collider, a mesh in here that matches them. You could probably use a different one that doesn't quite match it if you wanted to, but you'd have to really experiment to see which ones worked. So I'm going to end this video. And play with stuff too. Don't just do what I do. Play with stuff. And off to the next video.